The door at the end of the corridor hasn't opened in 40 minutes. I've been watching it the way you watch something you're afraid of, not because you expect the worst, but because you've learned over many years that the worst tends to arrive without announcement, through ordinary doors, in ordinary light. On an ordinary Tuesday morning in January, when you're holding a coffee you don't remember buying, and the cup has gone from hot to warm, and you still haven't taken a single sip. My grandmother called me at 6 o'clock this morning. No explanation, no context, just her voice, clear and dry and deliberate, the way it always is when she has decided something, saying, "Come before the others wake up." That's the part one keep turning over. Before the others wake up. Most people, when something goes wrong, call everyone. They send the group message. They mobilize. My family is very good at mobilizing. They arrive in clusters with casseroles and opinions, and they fill every available inch of silence until you almost forget what you were feeling before they got there. She didn't call them. She called me. There's something strange about being summoned. Most people drift into the hard moments, pulled by current, pushed by circumstance, arriving because they happen to be nearby. Being summoned means someone made a choice. Someone thought, her specifically, not anyone else. Her. I'm 38 years old. I can count on one hand the number of times someone in my family has chosen me specifically on purpose, without it being a matter of logistics. I have my right hand in my coat pocket. In it, a small velvet box. Square. Dark green. The nap worn soft at the corners. I've been carrying it for 3 weeks. I found it in my mailbox the day after Christmas, my grandmother's handwriting on a folded piece of paper tucked underneath. Don't open this yet. The box has weight to it, not heavy, but present. The kind of weight that means something was put inside it with intention. I haven't opened it. I don't know, exactly, why I'm following the instruction of a 76-year-old woman who may or may not know what month it is, except that she always knows what month it is. She always knows everything. That's the thing about Iris Ashford that her family has spent decades getting wrong. If you've ever sat somewhere holding something someone gave you, waiting, for reasons you can't fully name, to be told it's finally safe to look, stay with me. This one goes all the way down. To understand why I'm here, I need to take you back. Not to the beginning. The beginning is too far and too ordinary. I need to take you back to a Saturday afternoon in a kitchen that smelled like almond and warm butter, and a woman who said, "You have my hands," and a brooch with dark red stones that I had been watching my whole life from a careful, patient distance. 2 years ago, I still believed the story I'd been telling myself. Not because it was convincing, because I'd told it long enough that I'd stopped noticing the parts that didn't fit. Let me take you back to a Saturday in October. My grandmother's kitchen. The light coming through the window the way it only does in autumn, low and golden and slightly apologetic, like it knows it's running out of time. Iris was teaching me her almond cake. Not from a recipe. From memory. From the particular tilt of her wrist over the bowl, from something she'd absorbed over 60 years of making the same thing in the same kitchen, and I was trying to follow her hands rather than her words, because her hands were where the actual instructions lived. Like this, she said. You fold it. You don't stir. Stirring is for people who don't trust the batter. I folded. She put her hands over mine to adjust the angle. Her fingers were cool and dry and certain. She looked at them for a moment, then at mine. You have my hands, she said. The rest of them got your grandfather's. All grip, no feel. I laughed. And something in my chest did a thing it didn't do very often. It settled. Quietly. Without announcement. Like a door closing gently in a house that had been full of drafts. That was the last time I felt entirely at ease in that kitchen. She was wearing the brooch, as she always did at family gatherings. Even here. Even in her own home on a Saturday, with flour on the counter. Small dark garnets in an old gold setting. I'd been watching it my whole life. The way it caught the light at a certain angle and threw a faint red shadow onto whatever it was pinned to. The way she touched it sometimes, absently. The way you touch something you forget you're wearing because it's been part of you so long. When I go, she said, unprompted, brushing flour from her hands. This goes to you. I told your father. It's in the paperwork. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Grandma. I'm not being morbid. I'm being organized. There's a difference. I waved it off. I changed the subject. I do that. Wave things off before I've properly held them. It's a reflex I developed so gradually, I couldn't tell you when it started. Somewhere along the way I had learned, in the particular wordless way you learn things in families, that wanting something was the first step toward losing it. That the things offered to me had a tendency to get redirected. So I stopped reaching, stopped holding on. I told myself it was maturity. Told myself I wasn't attached to things. The truth is I was attached to that brooch. I had been since I was 7 years old. But I didn't say that. I talked about the cake. Here is what the Ashford family looked like from the outside. Functional. Warm, even. 2 daughters. One more settled than the other, but loved equally. That's the version my parents would give you. Here is what it looked like from where I was standing. Delphine's 40th birthday, a reservation at Marceline's, the French place near the harbor that requires a month's notice on a weekend. 12 people. White tablecloths. My father paid. I watched my sister move through that dinner the way she moved through most things in our family, lightly, expectantly, like someone who has never had cause to doubt that the room is arranged for her comfort. My 38th birthday fell on a Monday in March. My mother texted, "So sorry. It's been a mad stretch. Let's celebrate properly next month." She added a cake emoji. The month came. Nothing was mentioned. I didn't bring it up. I told myself, she's busy. I told myself, it's not a big birthday. I told myself, in the particular exhausted voice of someone who has run out of explanations and is simply manufacturing new ones, it doesn't matter. I said that a lot. A year before the almond cake afternoon, my father gave Delphine a loan for her kitchen renovation. Interest-free. $40,000. Just to get you started, he said, like it was a hand on the shoulder, like it was barely worth discussing. I know the amount because Delphine mentioned it, not to be unkind, just casually, the way you mention something when it hasn't occurred to you that the person across from you might find it difficult to hear. That same year, I was starting over. New apartment. A difficult 12 months I won't fully explain right now, except to say that Fletcher was gone, and I was rebuilding something from rooms that felt too large and too quiet. I asked my father, once, carefully, for less than a quarter of what he'd given Delphine. He listened the way he always listened, very still, very composed, the expression of a man who has already done the arithmetic and is now waiting for you to finish so he can deliver the answer he prepared before you started speaking. "We can't really right now," he said. "Things are a bit tight." I nodded. I said I understood. I went home and reorganized my kitchen cabinets at 10 o'clock at night, every item grouped by category, every label facing forward, because my hands needed something to do that wasn't shaking. I didn't ask again. The third thing is the one that sits with me the longest. 2 winters ago, Delphine's marriage hit a rough patch. I won't say more than that. It's not my story to tell in detail, but the family response was immediate and total. My mother drove to Delphine's house and stayed for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. She slept in the guest room. She cooked. She was there when Delphine woke up, and there when she went to sleep. My father offered to pay for couples counseling. The family group chat, 12 people, most of whom I speak to 3 times a year, ran for days. "We're here. Whatever you need. You are so loved." That same year, Fletcher and I ended. Badly and quietly, the way things end when 2 people have been circling a conclusion for long enough that the actual moment is almost a formality. I told the family at Sunday dinner. Mentioned it the way you mention something you're trying to normalize through casualness. My mother looked up from her plate. "These things happened," she said. My father passed the potatoes. The table moved on. I sat there and watched him move on and did the thing I had become very good at doing. I made my face neutral and I reached for my water glass and I held it with both hands, not because it was heavy, just because I needed something to hold, and I told myself it wasn't deliberate. I told myself family love isn't always equal. It's just different shapes. I told myself this so many times that I stopped hearing the words. The way you stop hearing a sound that's been going on too long. At every family dinner, through all of it, Iris wore the brooch. I watched it. I couldn't help it. The small dark stones in their old gold setting, catching the light at that particular angle. The one thing I'd let myself want without apology, because I'd been told, specifically in writing, that it was already mine. I should have known better than that, too. But here is what I didn't understand then. The loan, the dinners, the 2 weeks, the counseling, the group chat, and the potatoes passed without pause. None of that was generosity. All of it was investment. And I was about to find out, in the most calculated way possible, exactly what I was worth to them. 2 weeks before Christmas, I drove to my parents' house to help with holiday preparations. This is the kind of thing I did. Reliably. Without being asked twice. I arrived early, I stayed late, and I did the tasks that needed doing without making them feel like tasks. My mother called it being dependable. I called it what it was, the particular industry of a person who has learned that usefulness is the safest form of love. That if you keep your hands busy enough, no one examines what's underneath them. I offered to set the dining room table. The good tablecloth lives in the sideboard, the old mahogany one in the dining room that's been in that spot since before I was born. I pulled open the drawer and reached past the folded linen, and my hand found an envelope before my eyes did. I looked at it. My father's handwriting. Block letters, the way he always writes when something is official. And in the upper left corner, a firm name I recognized immediately because I'm a paralegal and I have been for 11 years, and you don't work in estate law for 11 years without knowing every firm in the city by its return address. Hargrove and Associates. Confidential. Hargrove and Associates does one thing. One specific, meticulous, irrevocable thing. I put the envelope back. I lifted out the tablecloth. I closed the drawer with my hip, the way you close a drawer when your hands are full, the way you close something when you need to look like you weren't just standing there reading the return address on your father's estate documents at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning. I set the table. Every placement is exact. Napkins folded in thirds, always thirds, silverware aligned to the 1/4 inch. I stood back and looked at it when I was done and thought, I'm reading into things. Hargrove does other work. Trusts, property transfers, business succession. It could be anything. I smoothed a crease in the tablecloth that wasn't there. It could be nothing. The silverware was already straight. I straightened it again. Christmas Day. The house was full in the way my parents' house always was at Christmas. Loud and warm and slightly orchestrated. The way things are when someone has been planning them for weeks and needs them to look effortless. My mother moved between the kitchen and the dining room with the particular energy of a woman who controls her anxiety by controlling her environment. My father stood at the counter carving the turkey with the same expression he brings to everything that requires precision. Delphine's children ran circuits through the living room, shrieking about something involving a toy that needed batteries. Someone had put on Christmas music, low enough to be ambient. Iris was in her chair by the window. She always sat there, the wingback with the view of the garden slightly apart from the main activity of the room. Watching. That's what she did at these gatherings. The family had long ago decided she was simply aging gracefully into passivity. They were wrong about that, as they were wrong about most things involving my grandmother. But I didn't know that yet. About an hour before dinner, Iris mentioned she'd left her cardigan upstairs. I went to get it. Her room is at the end of the hall. I passed the study on the way. The door was pulled almost shut, maybe 3 inches of open space, and through that space I heard my father's voice. Low. Deliberate. The voice he uses when he's explaining something he's already decided and wants the explanation to sound collaborative. I stopped. I don't know why I stopped. I should have kept walking. It was never going to be a clean split. His voice. Even now I can hear the precise texture of it. Unhurried. Reasonable. The voice of a man delivering a conclusion he reached weeks ago. You know how Colette is. She'd spend it on nothing that mattered. At least with you, it stays in the family. A pause. Then Delphine. Does she know? She doesn't need to know. That's the point. I have heard people describe moments like this as the floor tilting. The room is going sideways. Everything is going dark or bright or slow. None of that happened. The light in the hallway was exactly what it had been. Winter gold through the window at the end. The carpet under my feet was the same carpet. The sounds from downstairs continued. My niece, the music, and a burst of laughter about something that had nothing to do with this. The world was entirely, perfectly, insultingly unchanged. I was the only thing that had moved. I got the cardigan. I went back downstairs. I handed it to Iris, and she looked at me just for a moment, the way she looks at things when she is filing information, and I looked back at her and I didn't say anything and she didn't say anything, and I went to find something to do with my hands in the kitchen. I sat through that dinner. I passed the gravy. I answered questions about work. I asked Delphine's youngest about his school play and listened to the answer. I laughed at something my uncle said. I did all of it cleanly, automatically, with the ease of someone who has been rehearsing this particular performance since she was old enough to understand that certain feelings were not welcome at the table. 38 years of practice. The body knows. I left at 9 o'clock. Headache, I said. My mother told me to drive safely. At the door, Delphine hugged me, and she held on a second longer than usual, her arms tightening just slightly before she let go. I didn't know if it was guilt or wine or just the particular sentimentality that Christmas produces in people who have gotten what they wanted. I didn't look at my father. I found my coat and I found the door and I found my car and I drove. I made it to my apartment. I made it inside. I locked the door behind me and stood in the hallway with my coat still on. Then I sat down on the floor. Not dramatically. Not in collapse. I just sat. Like standing had become a project I no longer had the funding for. I sat there in my coat on the hallway floor, and the thing that happened wasn't crying exactly. It was more like something that had been holding its breath for a very long time, simply exhaling. A slow, complete, structural release. I didn't just lose the inheritance that night. I need you to understand that. I lost the story. The one I had been constructing and maintaining and patching for 38 years. The story where they were imperfect but trying, where the loan and the birthday and the potatoes and the these things happen were oversights, not a pattern. Not a verdict. I lost the reason for every Christmas I had driven to that house. I lost every version of my father that I had spent my entire life trying to earn. But here is what I didn't know sitting on that floor. One person in that house had not been passive. One person had been watching the whole architecture of that family with clear, unhurried eyes, and had been calculating, quietly and meticulously, for months. I wouldn't find out what she had already set in motion until much later. But she had started before any of us arrived for dinner. January is the cruelest month for this kind of thing. Not because of the cold, though the cold doesn't help. Because January has no occasion to hide behind. No holiday logistics to organize, no family calendar to navigate, no reason to be anywhere or do anything that anyone would notice if you didn't. January just sits there, gray and unhurried, and waits for you to be honest about what happened in December. I told my supervisor it was a family matter, which was technically accurate, and also the most compressed sentence I have ever spoken. It took 2 weeks. I stayed in my apartment. I didn't clean. That's the thing I remember most clearly about those weeks, not the sadness, exactly, but the specific failure of small tasks. Dishes left to soak and forgotten. A coat I wore inside for 3 days, because hanging it up felt like more decision-making than I had available. I ate things that came in packaging I could throw away directly, because the distance between hungry and washing a pot had become, temporarily, uncrossable. I answered every message. That part one kept. I composed each response carefully, doing okay, just a quiet stretch. Thanks for checking in. And the labor of sounding fine when you aren't fine is something I can only describe as a second job. Exhausting in a way that leaves no marks. The kind of tiredness that looks, from the outside, exactly like rest. About 10 days in, I opened Iris's jewelry box. I'd picked it up during the holiday chaos. She'd asked me to bring it to her at some point, along with a few other things from her room. I hadn't opened it before then. I set it on my kitchen table and lifted the lid and worked through the top tray, earrings, a string of pearls, and the watch she wore in summer. And then I reached the second tray and found the small velvet square in the lower left corner. Empty. I knew what went on there. I had known since I was 7 years old. I could have told you the exact dimensions of the thing that was missing, the weight of it, the way the garnets looked in kitchen light versus the particular way they caught a candle at Christmas dinner. I stared at that empty square for a long time. Then I closed the box. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not the hallway this time. The kitchen. The cold tile was through my jeans. I sat there and looked at the cabinet under the sink and thought about Fletcher. Not with longing, I want to be clear about that. Fletcher leaving was its own kind of loss, but it had been long enough that the shape of it had changed. What I was thinking about, sitting on that floor, was the story I'd told myself about why he left.
Timing, I'd said.
Circumstance. It was difficult that year. Anyone would have found it hard. But here, on the floor with the empty jewelry box on the table above me, I was starting to understand something I hadn't been ready to see before. I had spent my whole life becoming very easy to be with, right up until the moment I needed something. And then I became, in the accounting of the people around me, a problem. Fletcher had operated on exactly the same logic as my family. I had noticed because it felt familiar. Familiarity had felt, for a long time, like home. It wasn't home. It was just the only architecture I'd ever been given. On a Wednesday afternoon, 6 weeks after Christmas, someone knocked on my door. A woman from down the hall. I had seen her in the elevator maybe a dozen times over 2 years. In her 60s, silver hair pulled back, she had the particular self-containment of someone who had long since stopped needing to explain herself to anyone. She was holding a parcel. "Wrong door," she said. I kept meaning to bring it sooner. "I'm sorry, life." She held it out. I took it. She was already turning back down the hall before I'd finished saying thank you, and I'm not sure she heard me, and I don't think she was waiting to. I stood in my doorway for a moment after she'd gone. No calculation in that exchange. No history, no ledger, no price attached to the giving. She had simply seen something that wasn't hers and corrected the error, without ceremony, without requiring anything back. A transaction so clean it felt, after 6 weeks of tallying everything, almost incomprehensible. I closed the door. I stood in my kitchen, and something that had been wound very tight for a very long time, not broken exactly, recalibrated, quietly, without drama, the way a compass corrects when you've been holding something magnetic too close. I had spent 38 years trying to earn space in a room I was already in. That's the thing I understood, standing in my kitchen on a Wednesday in January with a misdelivered parcel in my hands. The attempt was a mistake. Not because I wasn't worth it. I need to say that clearly because I spent a long time confusing those two things. The trying was the mistake because their definition of worth was a target that moved. It was never actually about what I did or didn't do. It was about what I reflected back to them. Whether I made them feel generous, capable, correct. Whether I was a surface they could feel good about looking at. I had been a mirror in a family that didn't like what they saw. I was done with that. Not vengeful. I want to be precise about this. There was no plan forming, no satisfaction in the idea of confrontation. I wasn't going to show up at a family dinner with documentation and a prepared statement. There wouldn't be another family dinner. That chapter had closed so quietly that most of them hadn't heard it yet. I was going to live, specifically and deliberately, in ways that had nothing to do with what my family would recognize as success. I went back to work that Monday. The following morning, I sent an email to a colleague I'd always respected, a woman at an estate firm across town who I'd worked with on a probate matter 3 years ago. Just a professional note. A thread pulled toward me, gently. Nothing more than that. I'm a paralegal. I know what documents can do. I had always known. And somewhere across the city, though I didn't know it yet, my grandmother was making her own phone calls. 14 months. That's how long it took for my life to stop feeling like something I was surviving and start feeling like something I was actually living. I know that sounds like a small distinction. It isn't. I was promoted in March, not dramatically, not with fanfare, just a title that finally matched what I had been doing for 2 years without the corresponding credit. My supervisor said it should have happened sooner. I said thank you and meant it without qualification, which was newer than it sounds. I had spent a long time receiving compliments the way you receive unwanted mail, acknowledging receipt without letting it fully in. I had a desk near a window now. Morning light. Good coffee I'd started buying properly, not the cheapest option on the shelf. 2 friends I saw regularly, not constantly, not with the desperate frequency of someone filling a hole, but with the easy rhythm of people who have decided they like each other and act accordingly. Small things. The kind of things that don't look like a life from the outside but feel, unmistakably, like one from the inside. I called Iris every Wednesday at 11 o'clock. I had not been back to the family home. I want to be clear about how I left, because people assume there was a confrontation, a phone call, some formal declaration of severance. There wasn't. I simply stopped filling the space. I missed the Easter gathering. Then a birthday dinner in June. I sent a card for my birthday. I'm not interested in cruelty for its own sake, and I got exactly 1 text from my mother. We missed you. I hope everything's okay. I read it 3 times, trying to find a version of it that was more than it was. It was exactly what it appeared to be. The family's way of saying, "You are malfunctioning. Please return to your previous settings." I did not reset. The Wednesday calls with Iris started as check-ins and became, gradually, something I didn't have a word for at first. Not therapy. Not strategy. Something closer to translation. Iris had been watching my family from her chair by the window for longer than I had been alive, and she had the particular clarity of someone who loves people without requiring them to be other than they are. She told me things. Slowly, carefully, across many Wednesdays. Not gossip, she was very precise about that distinction.
History.
The renovation loan to Delphine, $40,000, was never repaid, never mentioned. A second property in my father's name that didn't appear in any conversation I had ever been part of. Decisions Warren had made about the family estate, quiet, unilateral decisions that my mother had been informed of after the fact, if at all. I listened. I let it in. Receiving things was still something I was learning, but I was learning it. I need to say this plainly. I was not building toward anything. I was not gathering information as ammunition. I called Iris on Wednesdays because she was the only person in my family who had ever told me the truth without being asked, and I was only now, at 38, understanding what it felt like to be known rather than assessed. The legal knowledge was incidental. It was also, as things turned out, useful. In the 11th month, a colleague mentioned something in passing, a technical observation about an estate structure she'd seen in a case that bore a striking resemblance to something Iris had described to me. A significant structural error, the kind that looks fine on a surface reading and falls apart under scrutiny. The kind that would benefit Delphine enormously and hollow out the specific bequests Iris had spent years making deliberate. I recognized it immediately. I sat with what I knew for 4 days. I could have called my father's attorney. I had the contact, I had the professional basis for raising the concern, and I could have done it anonymously, and no one would have known where it came from. I sat with that option the way you sit with something that might detonate. Not because I was afraid of the damage, but because I wasn't certain anymore whose hands the detonation belonged in. On the 4th day, I called Iris. I told her exactly what I'd found. The structure, the error, and the probable consequence if it were left to stand. I used plain language. I didn't editorialize. She was quiet for a moment. "I'll make an appointment," she said. That was all. She didn't ask me what she should do. She didn't ask for my opinion on the people involved, or their intentions, or whether they deserved what the error would have given them. She simply received the information, processed it with the efficiency of a woman who has spent 7 decades deciding things, and told me she would handle it. I believed her. I went back to work. 14 months after Christmas, my phone rang at 7 in the evening. Voicemail. My mother's voice, measured, careful, the precise calibration of someone who has decided how much information to release and is now executing the delivery. Grandma had a fall. She's fine. They say she'll be out by the weekend. Your father thinks you should know. I listened to it twice. Your father thinks you should know. Not. We need you here. Not. Please come. We want you with us. Your father thinks you should know, the way you'd notify a neighbor or a distant cousin, or someone whose connection to the situation is acknowledged but peripheral. I had called this woman every week of my life until 14 months ago. I had driven to that house for every Christmas and Easter and birthday dinner for 38 years. Her mother was lying in a hospital bed. Your father thinks you should know. I was already getting my coat. This is where we came in. The hospital corridor. The plastic chair. The door at the end of the hall has been watched by me for 40 minutes, like it might do something I'm not prepared for. The coffee in my hand went from hot to warm while I wasn't paying attention. Now you know why I'm here. Now you know what I've been carrying in my coat pocket. A nurse came out about 20 minutes after I arrived. In their 50s, efficient, with the particular warmth of someone who does hard work and has decided to enjoy it anyway. She looked at me and said, "You must be the one she asked for." I said I was. She was very specific. A small smile. She said, "The younger one, not the one who comes with the husband." I did laugh at that. I couldn't help it. It came out of me sharp and sudden, the first real laugh in longer than I could accurately calculate, and it felt like something loosening behind my sternum that had been wound there since December. That was Iris, precise to the last detail. She was sitting up when I came in, already dressed, not in a hospital gown, in her own clothes, the gray cardigan she'd asked someone to bring, and pinned to the left lapel, catching the thin winter light that came through the blinds in pale horizontal strips. The brooch, the dark garnets in their old gold setting, right there, on her chest, in a hospital room at 7:40 in the morning. She did not look like a woman who had fallen. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for an appointment she'd scheduled herself. "I owe you an explanation," she said, "about a morning." I sat down in the chair beside her bed. What morning? Christmas morning. Her hands were folded in her lap. Still. Certain. Before anyone else was up. She had known since October. Warren's attorney had called the house. A confirmation call. Routine, the kind of administrative contact that happens after documents are signed. Warren had assumed Iris was asleep. She wasn't. She answered on the second ring, said very little, took down nothing because she needed to take down nothing, and hung up. She said she spent 2 months being still after that. Not inactive. Still. There is a difference, she told me, between waiting because you don't know what to do and waiting because you are deciding exactly what to do and timing is everything. On Christmas morning at 6:15 a.m., while I was still an hour's drive away and my parents' house was quiet and the turkey was in the refrigerator waiting for my father's careful attention, Iris got dressed. She put on the brooch. She called a cab. She sat outside the attorney's office on a bench in the December cold until it opened. She filed papers at 8:47 a.m., a direct bequest. Structured outside the family trust entirely, her house, the house she had lived in for 40 years and that had never, not once, been part of my father's estate planning because it was never his to plan around. A specific sum. The brooch, named explicitly with my name beside it. Witnessed. Dated. Irrevocable. By the time my father was carving the turkey, it was already done. I sat with that for a moment. The room was very quiet. Through the blinds, the January light moved slightly as something passed outside. I thought about my father restructuring a document he believed was significant, redistributing, consolidating, protecting assets he decided I couldn't be trusted with. All that calculation. All that deliberate, meticulous arrangement. around something that was never his. He had made Delphine the primary beneficiary of a family trust that was now, in the most important sense, beside the point. He had spent months making careful decisions about generosity that wasn't his to give. He would not discover this until probate. By then it would be written in stone, witnessed and filed, and entirely beyond the reach of anyone's second thoughts. Warren Ashford had restructured his generosity and found out, too late, that it wasn't his to restructure. They arrived at 10 o'clock. My father first, then my mother, then Delphine behind them, holding 3 coffee cups she didn't need, and wearing the expression of someone who has been given instructions on how to seem. They came through the door and found me already in the chair beside Iris's bed. The room shifted. Not dramatically, no one gasped, no one stopped in the doorway. But something changed in the geometry of it, the way a room changes when the expected arrangement turns out to be wrong. They had pictured something. This wasn't it. My father recovered first. He always does. "We didn't know you'd be here so early." She asked me to come. My mother moved to kiss Iris's cheek. Iris accepted it without particular warmth or coldness, the way you accept something that is offered correctly, but not quite earned. Said nothing. My mother straightened up and looked at me with the expression she uses when she is trying to determine what category of situation she is in. Delphine set the coffee cups on the windowsill. She didn't look at me directly. I noticed that. My father pulled a chair to the foot of the bed and sat with the deliberateness of a man establishing that he is in charge of the room's agenda. "Colette." A pause he used to make space for what was coming. "We've been meaning to talk to you. About Christmas. You left early. We didn't get a chance to explain." I know what the explanation would have been. Something moved behind his eyes. He recalibrated. I watched him do it. Watched him select a different approach the way he selects a tool for a specific job. We were trying to be practical. You have to understand, it wasn't about you. It was about structure. About what makes sense for the family. The room was very quiet. I looked at my father. I looked at this man who had stood at a counter on Christmas Day and carved a turkey while 40 miles away his mother sat on a bench in the December cold to undo what he'd done. This man who had stood in his study 2 weeks before and told my sister that keeping the money in the family meant keeping it away from me. I am the family. 3 words. I didn't plan them. They were just true, and I had spent such a long time not saying true things out loud that the experience of it was almost physical, like setting down something heavy that I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing the weight. My father's hand went to his lapel. That gesture. I'd seen it 1,000 times. He touches his jacket when he needs a moment that he doesn't want to admit he needs. He wasn't steadying himself. He was just reaching for something solid and familiar. He didn't speak. Not because he had nothing prepared. My father always has something prepared. But because what I'd said didn't leave a gap for his version. There was no misunderstanding to correct, no emotion to manage, and no reframing available. He was looking at his daughter and finding, perhaps for the first time in 38 years, that she was not waiting for him to explain what had happened. She already knew. She had always known. And she was sitting in the room where all of it was true simultaneously, what he had done and what his mother had done in response, and the fact that one of those things was irrevocable and the other was just history. Iris reached up and unpinned the brooch. She didn't announce it. She didn't make a speech. She simply unclipped it from her cardigan with steady fingers and held it out toward me, palm open, in front of all of them. I took it. I didn't put it on. I held it in my closed hand, the garnets cool and smooth against my palm, the old gold warm from her body. I knew what I was holding, not just the stones and the setting, the morning of December 25th, a bench in the cold, an office opening at 8:30, a 76-year-old woman sitting across from an attorney and saying, with the quiet authority of someone who has been deciding things for a very long time, "Here is what I want. Write it down." Delphine was looking at her shoes. My mother was looking at Iris. My father was looking at nothing in particular, the middle distance that men look at when the room has stopped cooperating with their understanding of it. I didn't close the door on them. That's not what this was. But I didn't step aside either. I sat in my chair at my grandmother's bedside with the brooch in my hand, and I let the silence do what silence does when you finally stop filling it. It's Wednesday. No occasion. No reason. Just the early light coming through the kitchen window at the angle I've learned to watch for, low and pale in winter, higher and warmer now that the months have turned, landing on the counter in a way that makes everything look like it was arranged on purpose. I'm making almond cake. No recipe. I don't need one anymore. My hands know the fold, the particular motion Iris showed me on a Saturday afternoon that feels, now, like it happened in a different chapter of a book I've since finished. I measure by feel. I fold, not stir. The batter comes together the way things come together when you've stopped forcing them. The radio is on low. Something instrumental, unhurried. I'm not listening to it exactly. It's just company. The good kind. The kind that doesn't require anything back. The brooch is on the kitchen shelf. In its velvet box, the lid closed, sitting between a small plant I've managed not to kill and a cookbook I've had for years and never opened. I haven't worn it. I'm not sure I will. That's not a decision I've made so much as a question I've stopped pressuring myself to answer. It used to mean that someone saw me and decided I was worth something. Now it means that someone saw me and simply knew that I was. There's a difference between being assessed and being known. I spent 38 years inside the first one, mistaking it for the second. It took me a long time to understand that only one of them is love. That love isn't a conclusion someone reaches about you after weighing the evidence. It's just recognition. The kind that doesn't require you to keep proving the same thing. Iris knew that. She had always known. She's still in my life. We talk on Wednesdays. The calls are easy now in a way they weren't even a year ago, not because anything is different between us, but because I've stopped waiting for the thing I'm receiving to be taken back. I just received it. Delphine has texted twice. Carefully worded messages, slightly formal, are the texts of someone who is trying to locate the right register for a relationship that doesn't have a name anymore. I've replied both times. Briefly. Without cruelty. Without warmth I don't have yet. That door is neither open nor closed. I've stopped deciding what it should be and started just watching what it is. My parents I haven't seen since the hospital.
I don't know if that will change.
I used to spend a significant amount of energy on that question, running the possible futures, calculating the variables, trying to locate the version where everything resolves cleanly. I've stopped. Not because I've forgiven or not forgiven, but because the question turned out to be less important than I thought. Some doors you don't close. You just stop standing in front of them, waiting. I traded one kind of loneliness for another. I want to be honest about that. The old kind was loud. Even when it was silent, the loneliness of being in a room full of people who had decided, quietly and collectively, that you were the one they could afford to lose. This kind is quieter. Some mornings it tastes exactly like freedom. Some mornings it's just quiet. But it's mine. Both kinds of mornings. Mine entirely. The cake is in the oven. The kitchen smells like almonds and warm butter. I'll call Iris at 11. If you're somewhere right now holding something that was promised to you, something that was taken and then quietly given back, and you're trying to decide whether receiving it means forgiving the taking, those aren't the same questions. You can hold what's yours without answering for what they did. You don't have to resolve one to claim the other. You've known that for a while. You've known it longer than you've let yourself admit. I'll have another one of these waiting whenever you're ready.